How do I know if my child is eligible for special education?
A child needs special education if he has a disability that interferes with learning and as a result cannot make adequate educational progress without special help. Children learn at very different rates, especially when they're young. A child who learns a little slower than others may not need special education. But if a child is getting further and further behind, or just can't seem to make progress after she's been in classrooms with good teachers and a solid curriculum, then the child might need special education.
How can I get special education for my child?
In order for a child to get special education, the child must be evaluated and determined by a team to be eligible for special education. The first step for getting a child evaluated is the referral process. This usually starts with a written request by a parent to the principal that the child be evaluated to determine eligibility for special education services. Following a referral, the child will be tested by a school psychologist. This is also called being evaluated. Then, a group of knowledgeable school personnel will meet with the parent to go over the evaluation and look at the criteria for eligibility.
Can my preschool-age child be evaluated and provided special education?
Yes. Beginning at age 3, children can be evaluated by the local public school district. If you suspect that your 3 to 5-year-old child has a disability, then you should request an evaluation from the local school administrator in charge of preschool services. You should make this request in writing. The same timelines, rules, and procedural protections that apply to school-age children and their parents also apply to preschool children and their parents. Like school-age children, preschool children who qualify for special education are entitled to have an individualized education program, an IEP. However, the IEP does not necessarily have to include a full day of school. Sometimes preschool children will be offered related services, such as speech or occupational therapy. It is a matter for the child's IEP team to determine what services he needs to get a free, appropriate public education.
Is my child entitled to special education if he attends a charter school?
Yes. The IDEA, federal regulations, and North Carolina policies apply in the same way to charter schools as they do to other public schools. Charter schools or charter management organizations are considered to be local educational agencies, which are the organizations that must implement the IDEA at the local level.
What are the basic requirements for a child to get special education?
There are 4 basic criteria for eligibility for special education. First, the student must be aged 3 through 21. Second, the student must have a disability that fits into one of the 14 categories established by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Third, that disability must have an adverse impact on the student's education. And fourth, the student must require specially designed instruction to make reasonable educational progress. The definitions for each category of disability and the specific criteria for each one can be found in the North Carolina policies governing children with disabilities. The policies can be found on the website of the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Exceptional Children Division. The Department of Public Instruction also publishes worksheets for each disability that can be used by IEP teams to help them apply the criteria. The worksheets can also be found on the Department of Public Instruction's website.
What does it mean for a disability to have an adverse impact on the student's education?
This phrase is not defined in the IDEA itself, in the federal regulations, or in the North Carolina policies. A school district will likely recognize an adverse impact on the student's education when the child is receiving failing grades in school or is testing as not proficient on the end-of-grade tests. More difficult cases are those in which the child is able to get passing grades, but does so only because of outside help or because he gets rewarded for effort, but is not actually learning the content. Other difficult cases are those in which the child struggles in areas such as communication, behavior, and social interaction. Because these non-academic abilities, also known as functional skills, are part of what is taught in school, they are also a part of a student's education. When a child's abilities to communicate, interact, and behave appropriately are not developing as expected as a result of a disability, then the child's disability is said to have an adverse impact on the child's educational performance.
What does it mean that the student must require specially designed instruction?
In short, it means that the student cannot make reasonable progress when in a regular classroom receiving the same instruction as everyone else. Instead, the student needs a special education teacher to adapt the instruction to meet his unique needs. This can mean adapting the curriculum itself, the teaching strategies, the way the material is delivered, or the setting in which the learning occurs. For example, specially designed instruction could be a specialized reading program designed for children with reading disabilities, simplified written materials, or visual aids. The ways the instruction can be specially designed are virtually limitless. It all depends on what a particular student needs to be able to learn the material, given the limitations he has because of his disability. Reasonable progress typically means mastering the standard curriculum for the grade and moving along from grade to grade. It can also mean achieving age and grade level expectations for things like communication skills, social skills, and physical skills. For children with intellectual disabilities, reasonable progress may not always mean being at grade level, but instead may mean moving along well in the development of academic and functional skills in a way that is appropriate for their abilities.
Do classroom interventions have to be finished before a child can be evaluated for special education?
No. A parent may refer her child for evaluation anytime the parent believes the child needs special education. A special education evaluation can begin at the same time that classroom interventions are being offered. In some situations, it may be beneficial to allow the teacher to try some different approaches in the classroom to see if a child can get past a period of difficulty without going through the evaluation process or being labeled disabled. These approaches are known by different names, such as response to intervention, which is sometimes called RTI, or Student Assistance Plan, sometimes known as SAP, or Student Support Team, which is known as SST, or Multi-Tiered System of Support, which can be known as MTSS. Although the law requires that interventions be tried before a child receives special education for specific learning disabilities, they can be provided during the 90-day period allowed for the evaluation process.
What does the term discrepancy refer to?
The term discrepancy in the special education context refers to the comparison of scores on certain tests used by school psychologists in evaluations for special education. More specifically, a discrepancy is found when there is a significant difference, that is, at least 15 points, between a child's IQ score and the child's score on an achievement test. The IQ score reflects the child's expected level of academic achievement, while the achievement score reflects the child's actual academic achievement. The IQ and achievement scores for typical children are in the same range. When a child's achievement is significantly lower than the child's IQ would predict, a learning disability is often suspected. While North Carolina has been using this discrepancy approach in identifying learning disabilities for many years, the approach is changing. As of July 2020, no school district will be permitted to use this approach. Instead, a specific learning disability will be identified by looking at the child's response to classroom instruction.
What if I think the evaluation done by the school is wrong?
First, parents should discuss any concerns they have about the evaluations of their child with the team members who are gathered to evaluate the child's eligibility. Parents should explain why they are not satisfied with the testing or its results and ask the psychologist to recommend and perform additional testing to address the issues of concern. If the parents and the school personnel cannot agree about the appropriateness or adequacy of the testing, then parents have the right to request an independent educational evaluation, also known as an IEE. An IEE is additional testing performed by a qualified psychologist or other professional who is not employed by the school district. The school districts must pay for the additional testing so long as the cost is reasonable. To get an IEE, a parent should write a letter to the principal or exceptional children facilitator expressing disagreement with the school district's evaluation and requesting an IEE. The parent can choose their own qualified evaluator or ask the school district for a list of professionals who may be available to perform IEEs. Once the parent requests an IEE, the school district must either agree to pay for the IEE or file a petition to ask an administrative law judge to decide on whether the school must pay for the IEE.
Does my child's disability label determine what special education services she's entitled to?
No, it doesn't. A child's needs determine what special education she is entitled to. There is no one-to-one correspondence between certain disabilities and certain services. In other words, the disability label does not control what services your child should get. Your child's IEP team should look carefully at the areas where she is having problems and determine what services, accommodations, and modifications she needs in order to make progress. Two children with the same disability label may have very different needs. That's why every child with a disability is entitled to an individualized education program.
Is my child limited to having only one category of eligibility listed on his IEP?
No. A child can have more than one category of eligibility listed on his IEP. Teams usually choose a primary area of eligibility and a secondary one. There is also a category for students who have multiple disabilities.
Does a doctor's diagnosis determine my child's category for special education purposes?
No, but the information about the doctor's diagnosis should be considered by the team determining eligibility. There can be differences between the criteria used by doctors to diagnose a particular condition and those used by the eligibility team in determining the need for special education. Most importantly, for special education purposes, there has to be a finding that the child's disability has an adverse effect on his education and that he requires specialized instruction to make reasonable educational progress. That determination must be made by the eligibility team, not a doctor.
Does my child have to fail a grade or his classes to be eligible for special education?
No, a child does not have to fail a grade or his classes to start the special education evaluation process, and failing is not a criterion for eligibility under the IDEA. However, there must be evidence that the child's disability is getting in the way of educational progress and that the child needs special education to make reasonable progress. If a child is at grade level and moving easily from grade to grade without any special support, then the child likely does not need special education. But if the child is only passing because the parents are providing a great deal of support at home or have hired tutors for the child, then he might need special education.
Can my child get special education to address only non-academic needs, such as behavior, organization, or daily living skills?
Yes. Some disabilities result in problems with functional skills. Functional skills are those that are not strictly academic, but are necessary to engage in routine activities of daily living and school progress. Functional skills include social interaction, communication, organization, ability to focus, behavior, personal care skills, mobility, adaptability, etc. All of these skills are needed to make good progress in school. If your child's disability is getting in the way of progress in these areas, then your child should be eligible for special education to develop those skills, even if your child does not need special education in academic areas. For example, a child with ADHD might not need help with a specific subject. Instead, he might just need help with concentration, organization, and behavior. For a child with ADHD, he could get special education that focuses on improvement in organization and behavior rather than reading or math.
Does my child's condition have to be permanent for him to be eligible for an IEP?
No. The law does not require that a child's disability be permanent in order to qualify for special education. A child is entitled to an IEP if he has one of the 14 listed disabilities and that disability interferes with educational progress. If the child meets these requirements, it does not matter that the child's condition may be temporary. For a child with a temporary disability, such as an injury, a 504 plan might be appropriate if he requires accommodations but does not need specialized instruction.
Once my child has qualified for special education, will he continue to get the services throughout his time in school?
Not necessarily. A child must continue to meet the eligibility requirements for special education to continue receiving the services. School districts should reevaluate all children receiving special education services at least once every 3 years. When the reevaluation occurs, the team will look at whether your child still qualifies for special education. If your child no longer fits into one of the 14 eligibility categories, or if he no longer needs special education to make reasonable progress, he can be exited from special education. Even if it is not time for the regular reevaluation, a child can be reevaluated if you or a member of your child's IEP team questions your child's continued eligibility. A child cannot be exited from services without an evaluation unless you, as a parent, withdraw consent for continued services.
If my child remains disabled, how long can she continue to get special education?
As long as a child remains disabled, she can continue to receive special education until she graduates with a regular high school diploma or until the end of the school year in which she turns 22. A question may arise when a student who has earned a diploma in the occupational course of study wishes to continue to receive special education services. Because the occupational course of study is not the same as a standard course of study, those students may be able to continue in special education after completion of OCS. Parents and students should discuss the student's needs with the student's IEP team.